Microsoft dropped earnings, which means we have new Xbox data to dive into. June 30th is the end of Microsoft's fiscal year, which means we get not only the quarter information, but the full year scope of how Microsoft performed during the last year. And well, they had actually a pretty phenomenal quarter compared to previous quarters, and I think, they did pretty darn well. So we're going to dive into the Xbox numbers here in a second, but at a high level, Microsoft brought in $56.2 billion dues. That's total revenue. But the net income, which is the amount of money that gets put into the bank account after all bills are paid, was $20.1 billion in net income. That is a significant amount of money. Now, for the entire fiscal year, Microsoft brought in $211.9 billion. But here's the crucial number. Microsoft put $72.4 billion into its bank account. Now, they've spent some of that money and they're about to spend some more. And for the astute observer, knowing that Microsoft is trying to buy Activision for nearly $70 billion, in just the last year alone, Microsoft has made enough money to pay for this acquisition in cash in a single year. To put that into perspective, that is just a gargantuan sum of money that Microsoft has made, and they're having no trouble clearly spending it here with Activision. So let's dive into the Xbox side here just a little bit deeper. So here up on the screen, you can see the Xbox content and services revenue growth year over year. That's Y/Y. And keep in mind that the most important numbers for this quarter are all the way over at the right, the fiscal year 23 Q4. And you can see that we're looking at growth at about 5% year over year. And so keep in mind that it's up against a previous year when sometimes console shortages were a thing, but we'll get into that here in just a second. But overall, you can see that Microsoft ended on a relatively positive note. It was not always a home run of a year. Microsoft is obviously doing a lot of things to try and grow that number. But overall, hey, growth is better than a decline. So these are the real important numbers here. So the gaming revenue grew 1% or 2% in constant currency, but we're not going to get into that detail. So revenue growth of 1%. Xbox content and services revenue grew 5%, driven by growth in third-party content and Xbox Game Pass. The Game Pass being key there because Xbox hardware revenue declined 13%. So what is this actually telling us? Because somebody's going to look at this and say, Brad, hardware revenue declined. It's bad. Like that is well, is it though? Because remember, Microsoft says time and time again, judges by our content and services revenue, which grew 5%. And keep in mind that gaming revenue grew 1%, even though hardware revenue was down 13%. And keep in mind, revenue is the raw number. It's not profit. It's the overall number. So in fact, like when you kind of break this apart, it was actually potentially a pretty decent quarter for Microsoft that they were able to offset that decline in hardware revenue by growth in Game Pass. Now, annoyingly, and which is really annoying, is Microsoft has not provided us with any sort of data that would help us know if Game Pass subscribers have grown, because they did not yet again give us anything. Now, also, surprise, surprise, they did not provide any data when it comes to the console sales. However, we did get this bit of information earlier in this year, and it's kind of hard to extract out where we are, but definitely north of 21 million consoles have been sold. And so Microsoft would obviously pile on top of that 21 million number, whatever was sold this quarter, so maybe another 1 or 2 million. We don't quite know, but yeah. Anyways, the key here is that Game Pass is growing and Microsoft is going to be investing a lot because it's completely expected now that Microsoft will close the deal. Now, Microsoft also hosts an earnings call, which always comes after these numbers. And so there are a couple key quotes from Satya Nadella and Amy Hood. Amy Hood is the CFO of Microsoft, and obviously Satya is the CEO. So let's dive into those. So during this, they said Microsoft is expecting Xbox content and service revenue growth. This is coming from Amy Hood in the mid to high single digits for Q1 of 2024 fiscal year. So that means this quarter that we're currently in. Just keep in mind, Microsoft's not on calendar year. And obviously that is not accounting for anything that would happen with Activision Blizzard. Expect that would not close until later in the quarter. So they are not saying that there's any real guidance there on that growth. Well, on the hardware growth, there's no guidance, but Microsoft is saying mid to single digits for service growth, effectively for Xbox at the end of the day. Also, for the miss. So we got to understand that Microsoft had a little bit higher expectations for where this stuff would land, and Amy Hood said that there was weakness in first-party and third-party content performance. That really doesn't tell us anything other than first-party and third-party content sales and deliverables didn't really match up. Now, that could be related to Redfall. Remember that Redfall came out and it just didn't do all that well, and so that could very likely be that first-party platform, or product, I should say, that impacted Microsoft's revenue, because we all know what happened with Redfall. And then guidance, well, Microsoft isn't saying there's any hardware revenue guidance. Obviously, with a 13% decline this last quarter, I would expect something probably in that neighborhood potentially for the next quarter. But again, I don't have all their data, and so it's hard to tell what is really going on there. Now, Satya Nadella said on the the Activision Blizzard deal, he says, we continue to work through the regulatory approval process and remain confident about getting the deal done. And keep in mind that all projections currently do not include anything from ABK. Reminder that while we haven't had a video this week, which has been really nice, there's not been a whole lot of updating. We expect that potentially the earliest date this stuff might close would be August 29th. The deal officially, I believe, is extended until October 18th. And so just keep all that in mind as sort of the headlines come out here about Microsoft's gaming revenue. Now, clearly, once they do close Activision and or Blizzard, that whole Activision Blizzard, their revenue will increase significantly, and Microsoft will have to account for that year over year in their growth, and Game Pass will obviously grow. It would be nice if Microsoft would actually give us more detailed numbers, and honestly, I think they may have to. They might be sort of back up against the wall in that sort of situation, depending on how shareholders kind of react, because they're spending $70 billion to bring this in-house. Microsoft, in my opinion, should no longer be allowed to hide behind the subscription just growth, like 5%, which is good, but we should be getting raw numbers at that point because of how much money Microsoft is spending to grow it. I would think it could be argued that it is material. Others would probably argue that, look, revenue still reoccurring isn't material to the overall company. We're going to continue to hide this number, which is something we really don't want to see. But either way, Microsoft will be making big moves. It's very clearly confident that all this stuff is going to happen. It's going to go through. It's just a matter of getting things up. The UK CMA, I believe, did assign a legal team or legal firm to monitor the transaction, which is effectively saying Microsoft lives up to its agreement. It's just a procedural step of one more peg in the board of getting things closed. And so overall, though, Microsoft is in an incredibly healthy position. They have continued to outperform, I think, a lot of expectations just across the board, even with their challenges in Windows and now Azure and everything else. So yeah, those are the Xbox numbers that make the most sense and that you need to know about. If you want to stay updated on everything happening with Xbox and beyond, make sure to keep it subscribed here, because the only BS on this channel is me.